Good evening. It's so great to see everybody out there this evening. Welcome to the City of Sharonville's council meeting. If everyone could please stand, we're going to have a moment of silent prayer, and then I will lead you in the Pledge of Allegiance. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You can be seated. Roll call, please.
Mr. Wilson?
Here.
Mr. Lippert?
Here.
Mr. Duda?
Here.
Mr. Cook?
Here.
Mrs. Knight? Here. Mr. Schmidt?
Here.
And Mr. Tankersley is absent with notice.
Thank you. Reports and communication. Mayor Hardman.
Thank you. So one of the things that we started a while ago, actually Jim was responsible for heading this up, is our Good Neighbor Award, where we invite individuals in the public or council members, for that matter, or anybody who wants us to take a few moments to recognize individuals or organizations that have made a contribution to the city of Sharonville as good neighbors. So this copy has nominated somewhat related, but somewhat not, because there's some people that overlap on different groups of folks that we felt were appropriate for the Good Neighbor Award, and I am very glad to be able to present them with that award this evening. So the first one I'm going to share is this award was nominated for the Lovett family, and this is what it says. So in 1987, the Lovett family purchased Christmas decorations at an auction in the city of Ohio. They started the week before Thanksgiving, putting out this massive light display. They're all driving on street roads to a city. They turn on the lights the day after Thanksgiving and run this glorious display through New Year's Day. They have been doing this for the last 33 years, bringing joy to all in Sharonville. What a gift they give to our community. There's been a family tradition ever since, including the now fourth generation great-grandkids, of which there are a total of 7. Eden, who's 11, Izzy, who's 10, Willow, 9, Hunter, 4, Marshall, 2, Michael, 2, and Oakley, who's 1. This year, Glenn's oldest, Hunter, said he's a big help, and he definitely wanted to do everything. All the children help in their own way, whether they're helping set up smaller items and blow-up decorations, or carrying extension cords, gates, hammers, etc. And the youngest are there to witness the spectacle of it all. So Vicki and I will extend this on behalf of all of your elected officials up here, and probably a very large portion of the city of Sharonville who see those lights on a regular basis throughout the month of December and January. Want to thank the beloved family for sharing their Christmas spirit with her family, with our families, with the entire city of Sharonville. Mr. and Mrs. Virgil Lovett Sr., Virgil and Tracy Lovett, Jason and Amanda Hodge, Glenn and Meg Lovett, Andy and Jen Sasser, Amberly Lovett, Eden, Izzy, Willow, Hunter, Marshall, Micah, and Oakley. Thank you very much for being good neighbors in the city of Sharonville. Come on up. The whole crew down here. Come on up here. We'll let you guys go with nice, big, we got one for you guys. Then we got one for this crew. Then we got one for this crew. There we go. All right. Everybody squeeze it a little bit. One, two, three.
rent. What do you want to talk?
What we didn't have any information on is what that electric bill is every January. But we know that's part of the great contribution that you all make for the community and the like. And I know it's extended beyond just the hillside. I know that, obviously I've seen Glenn's house lit up and
Yes.
pretty soon we'll have the,
And
everywhere.
Amanda's.
And it's in there. So our next Good Neighbor Award, also nominated by our President of the Council, Ms. Hoppy, is going to the Sharonville Community Fund. And here's what Ms. Hoppy wrote. In 1967, the local churches and Mr. Harold Mayer decided to create one central location for those seeking assistance to turn to. And the Sharonville Christmas Fund was formed. In 1985, the fund gained its 501c3 status and is operated with the following mission statement. It is the intent of this organization to receive monies donated by those wishing to give necessary assistance to needy people in the Sharonville area, to administer the distribution of these funds for emergency type short-term needs efficiently and economically so as to aid as many needy people as possible, and to determine on a day-to-day basis the needs of those requiring assistance and the level of assistance available from this fund. Every year, they have seen an increase in requests for service with a 2017 year-end total of 510 people served in the food pantry alone. Sharonville Christmas Fund started its partnership with Free Store Food Bank in March 2018 with an initial food distribution of 2,259 pounds. By October 2018, their monthly distribution increased to 10,879 pounds. Those services went to 121 unique households and 470 unduplicated individuals. Since beginning the partnership with Free Store Food Bank, 2,788 individuals have been served, which has led us to increasing our services by more than 5-fold compared to the year before. They operate through an on-site pantry at the Sharonville Fire Department, mobile pantry programs at Yorktown Mobile Home Park, and on Sharondale Road. A partnership with Stewart Elementary School to provide produce pop-up pantries to students and families, and a partnership with Sharonville Elementary School to provide a weekly make-your-own power pack for students identified by the principal to be in high-need circumstances. There are some very devoted volunteers to this organization that without them, it would not function, it would not operate. And I know that I think I can say this on their behalf, that they would always welcome additional volunteers to help continue this very worthy, very worthy endeavor here in the city of Sharonville. But the following people, those that are here, come on up. So Tracy Lovett, who is the chairperson of the Sharonville Community Fund. Ben Castile, Sergeant Ryan Hermes, Amanda Hodge, Faye Wepkenberg, Janie Cattleman, and Jennifer Moore, our residential assistant intervention nurse. Thank you all very much.
That is on the Zoom. Yeah.
Thank you all very much. Well, you have the floor, you have the time, and obviously there's people here, there's people watching. So if anyone want to share a little bit more about the community fund, let somebody, you can volunteer if you need. You got to. So I can't hear you on TV, but we also have to.
Yes, Mayor. Free advertisement. Well, as a matter of fact, tomorrow morning, we have a mobile pantry tomorrow morning up at Yorktown. I think all these ladies will all be there, as will Ben, I'm sure, and possibly Ryan. But we're always looking for volunteers, so if anybody would like to just give us a call, we're more than happy to have you help at any time, monetarily or volunteering. That would be fine. So it's just, yeah. All righty.
Thank you,
Thank
Tracy.
you.
Thank you all for your volunteer work. Ms. Hoppy, thank you for taking the time to share those thoughts with us so that we could recognize one very worthy organization and one very worthy family for the contributions that they do for the city of Sharonville. So with that, I have no other news that I don't think Jim is going to cover in his report. So
Okay. And I'll take this brief moment that if you would like to leave, you don't have to stay for all this boring stuff, but if you want to stick around, you're more than welcome. We love having you. Safety Service Director, Mr. Lucas.
Thank you. I'll just wait a minute or so. So before we get into the legislation this evening, just wanted to provide an update on the matter that Mr. Rettig approached City Council on at the last council meeting regarding the retail me not curbside advertisements. Law Committee did discuss the issue and decided at this time not to pursue any type of regulation, but asked that I reach out to the company about any type of opt-out process. And they do have an opt-out process. We'll be sharing this in our hometown guide, the website, all applicable avenues. But for those who are viewing tonight, their opt-out process, you could do it 3 different ways. You could call 513-731-1200. You could email Cheryl White at cmdetton@Velassis, and Velassis is VALASSIS.com. Or you can go to Velassis's website where they have an opt-out section on the very bottom of the website. You click on it and it will take you to the opt-out form that you can fill out and send in to them. They do, from what I gathered from their CEO, they do take the opt-out pretty seriously, and if people are opting out and still getting the distributions, there's an avenue that they could fire the carrier, for instance, and as well as some other things. They do also have some GPS on their vehicles and a whole bunch of other things that we'll advertise as well in the hometown guide, but did want to provide that update. Not sure if anybody on Law Committee wants to add on to that at all, but if not, we'll go into the legislation.
Go ahead.
So this evening, there's 8 pieces on the council agenda. The Ordinance 2020-64 is related to Ordinance 21-5, 6, and 7, which all pertains to the subdivision, or not the subdivision, the development up at US 42 and Fields Erdel Road, the Anchor property development. The site plan regarding that development was in your packet. This evening, Margaret Comey, on behalf of the city, is, I believe, on via Zoom, as well as Tom Bowers and Brian Blade, representing Anchor Properties. At this point, I'll just turn it over to Margaret to talk about the pieces of legislation, the TIF and the development agreement primarily, and then I'm sure she'll refer to Tom and Brian for some words. I also, before Margaret, want to thank Scott McKeon for all of his efforts on with this item as well. Margaret?
Good evening. I hope you can hear me. I've unmuted myself. Jim, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Well, this has been an interesting project that I gather the city, in the person of Jim and Scott, have been working on with Anchor Properties for quite a while before I became involved, actually. But before you this evening are two ordinances that establish TIF areas, which will benefit this particular development. And we're calling these TIFs Lebanon Road TIF hyphen Lakota and Lebanon Road TIF hyphen Princeton. And while that might appear confusing, apparently some of the property that will be redeveloped by Anchor is in Butler County and in the Lakota School District. So even though those parcels have been annexed into the city of Sharonville, for purposes of the TIF and giving notice to the auditor and the impacted school district, we have to create the TIFs in Butler County for the Lakota School District parcels and in Hamilton County for those parcels that are in Hamilton County and the Princeton City School District. So the ordinances are essentially the same, other than the fact that by exhibit, they identify the parcels of land to which the TIF will apply. The TIFs, I should also say briefly, are maybe unusual for the city in that they are not the lengthier 30-year TIFs. These are only 10-year TIFs. And the exemption relates only to 75% of the value of improvements that will be made to the property. So we refer to these as 75-10 TIFs rather than 100% 30-year TIFs. The service payments that are generated by the parcels in these TIFs will come to the city by way of the settlement of real property taxes from the county treasurers. But the intention here is that the city will use those service payments that come in to reimburse Anchor Properties, which will put in certain public infrastructure improvement that the city and Anchor have agreed upon. And Anchor will make those improvements at their own cost. So they'll pay for them up front. And then over time, Anchor will be reimbursed for that cost from the service payments generated by those parcels, which they actually own or will own at the time. So that is my summary of the two TIF ordinances. I'd certainly entertain any questions. The third ordinance authorizes certain officials in the city to execute and enter into on behalf of the city the redevelopment agreement with the redevelopers LLC, which is Anchor Sharonville Partners LLC. And it is that agreement that sets out what the city and Anchor have agreed, which would be that Anchor would put in these infrastructure improvements and the city would reimburse them for the cost from the service payments. One last point is that the city, this is not a general obligation of the city, and the city's only obligation here would be to reimburse Anchor from the service payments that the city actually receives. So if the service payments weren't generated for some reason, the obligations under the redevelopment agreement to Anchor do not need to be paid from other city sources. I guess with that, I'll answer any questions you may have about the TIF creation, but it might be helpful to you if Scott and Anchor Properties personnel discuss the high points of the project, unless you have already been through that in a prior meeting.
Did anyone have questions? No? Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you all.
Tom or Brian, do you want to say anything?
They may be on.
Brian might.
Unmute.
No, Brian is unmuted.
This is Brian. Thank you for your consideration of the project. We've been working on this, I think, as most of you know, for a long, long time. We're very anxious to finally close on the property and start construction as quickly as possible. So we appreciate your cooperation throughout the long process.
I found my mute button. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Margaret, I really appreciate your efforts over the last 3 or 4 months working with our attorney, Dick Spoor, and I'm glad we got to this point tonight. This TIF area and the service payment agreements are very important to this project. We've been working on this project for 2 years now. We've had this 3.5 acres of land under contract for that period of time. And then almost a year ago, COVID hit and stopped everything. The tenants that we had who had signed leases backed out of those leases at that point, or they didn't want to move forward. And only here in late summer, early fall of this year, did the tenants decide to move forward, hopefully seeing light at the end of the tunnel here in 2021. But again, the TIF area and the service payment agreements and the other agreements are critical to this project starting and happening. And we're going to see good improvements at the intersection of US 42 and Fields Erdel Road. And we've got signed up so far a couple very good tenants. One is a national coffee retailer, which I'm sure maybe everyone's probably knows who it is, but it's one of the most popular gathering places in the mornings on the way to work or out and about. So we're excited to have that tenant lead the development. We expect to get out there next week and start on the early preliminary work. There's a couple houses, structures on the property that we need to do some asbestos abatement, and then demolition will occur. And then we'll start moving earth and start on the intersection work. And we apologize for the inconveniences that the intersection work is going to cause. But by the end of the year, that work will be completed, and it'll be a nice improvement for the city of Sharonville. And we're very excited to be part of this project and working with everybody at Sharonville. So thank you very much. Any questions about the project?
Did anyone have questions? No one has any, but thank you very much for being a part of this evening.
No, you're very welcome.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Margaret.
Okay, moving on with the legislation. Ordinance 2020-66, 67, and 68 are all public works related, either standard in nature or talked about in the budget approval. 66 deals with the purchase of rock salt. 67 is the new garage doors at the Public Works Garage, and 68 is the new roof at Golden View Acres. The last piece of legislation is 2021-10E, and Noah's here this evening to talk about that.
Excuse me. The purpose of ordinance 2021-10-E is to avoid a conflict with the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act between exempt and non-exempt employment. An employee is only permitted to hold one status at a time. So an employee holding two different status, an exempt position and a non-exempt position, that would violate that law. So what we're amending here is ordinance 9768 as it relates to pay for the Clerk of Council, which has historically been an exempt position. So the hourly non-exempt employees of the city of Sharonville would also be eligible to hold that position simultaneously. Essentially what it does is it converts the annual salary for that position into an hourly wage that can be paid throughout the year. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? I think we're all good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm sure Casey's going to be right on that.
That's all this evening.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Lucas? Seeing none, I was in a meeting yesterday. The mayor invites me to his meetings, and I got some great news for council. Josh is looking into our pads, computers, whatever. We're going to have a training on it, and everyone will need to attend that training for your computers or what have you. Once you receive these down the road here, you will only be able to, or should only be using the Sharonville email to correspond with anybody for city business. And this is to get us out of the loop of using our own private emails. Even though people think they're sending it to the city, it actually bounces to us at our private email, and then we answer on our private emails. This will avoid that. So when we get that, it's going to get rid of all this paper that we get. Yeah, you're welcome, Terry. And it's just going to make us a little bit more streamlined and a little bit more efficient and effective. They're going to be working with your committee and putting things in folders. So we have everything in one place. We can find it, we can see it, and we can stay up to date on everything. So it's a wonderful opportunity for us as council members to be able to have this tool. And I really appreciate Josh and Jim and the mayor and everyone coming up with these ideas, because I think it'll make us a better organization. And that's really all I have. I do want to say a thank you to Mr. Duda tonight. He is on Zoom. His mom had an emergency and he took the time to Zoom in tonight. So I really want to say thank you, and I hope all goes well with his mom. Sending lots of love and prayers.
May I just add, Vicki, on the,
Go ahead.
with regard to technology and especially as it relates to email, once we get that set up too, you won't just be restricted to using whatever devices we use to send email. We will be happy to figure out and help you work if
Oh,
we
yeah.
can
Here.
to using your own personal devices so that you can receive and send email through your Sharonville.com email, so that, I think that's going to help you in order to, obviously public records request, your email on public business is subject to public records request. And so this will enable us to be able to have copies of those emails so that that can be shared if it ever gets there. So it's not incumbent upon you individually to be able to hold on to those type of things. So I think that's just one of the things we're trying to deal with by doing this. But more importantly, I think what Vicki said is to give you the ability to try to reduce on the amount of paper that is exchanged by providing you, 2021 tools. Actually, they're probably more like 1990 tools. Finally getting us into that century, so to speak. All right, that's it.
Thank you. We appreciate the gift, so. All right, we're going to move on to our Clerk of Council, Mrs. Buhite.
Thanks. Just a reminder that there's a public hearing scheduled on our next meeting, February 9th at 7 PM, related to the rezoning of the portion of Hawk Road. And another reminder just to all of the elected officials to file the 2020 financial disclosure statements by May 17th.
And if you have done that, I know Casey did, I did, shoot Terry an email that you did it because everything's electronic now. And just shoot her an email. That way she kind of keeps track of us and she can yell at you if you don't do it by the end of April. And we know. Because that is very important to get that all done. We'll move to our law director, Mr. Pete Meyer. Okay. And it's good to see you just in a boot now. Yes. Right. And we have our, I had written them down, I just put them under mark. We have our auditor, Mr. Cunningham.
Thank you. So we have some good things to talk about. As you know, we made some transfers at the end of the year, and we were fortunate enough to be able to do that. And I'll let Kurt take the glory of talking about how good those receipts were. But I'll talk about the transfers. And what happened was at the end of 19, we set aside $2.5 million for debt, which we didn't do. At the end of 20, we set aside another over $1.3 million for debt, which left roughly $3.9 million that we'll be able to put down on the police note. So that is very good news, and so we were put in a position to do that. In addition to that, we split that amount at the end of 20 and put the other half into capital, and there were some various transfers made in the fire fund as well, which helped them out in retirement and capital. So very good end of the year, very fruitful in terms of being able to pay down debt. And so the year ended better than we actually anticipated. So very good news, and that's all I had to report.
All right, are there any questions? Seeing none, we'll go to our treasurer, Mr. Irie.
As Mr. Cunningham alluded to, the receipts, more good news. As you saw in the tax report, we finished up only 4.76% down from last year. That means that our tax receipts or our receipts in total for the year bested every year except 2019. So we exceeded the 2018 collections, and all throughout the year with COVID, we didn't think that was possible. So we landed in a good spot. The lodging tax was down for the year, 30.23%. And just wanted to touch base real quickly on some of our investments, because we don't talk about that a whole lot during the year, but we do have some of the city's investments with Red Tree Investments, and went back and looked at our ending for 2019 and then where we ended up in 2020. And even with the up and down market this year, we still had a net increase in our investments of $452,666. So good use of the invested money.
Great,
That's all I have.
thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none. Are there any residents this evening that wish to be heard? My favorite one's here. No, you're good? All right. Council committees, Community Development, Mr. Tankersley is absent. Community Services, Mr. Lippard.
Thank you. We're going to meet on February 3rd at 4 o'clock in the conference room. I can't remember if it was Mr. Blomer or Mr. Lucas who sent out an email about Gorman Park. So take a look at that design and get with myself or Mrs. Knight or Mr. Duda if you have any comments, any input, because this next meeting is going to be the time to give that input. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. you. And I think that did come from Mr. Lucas in his weekly updates. So if you're looking for the email, that's where you'll find it. Budget and Finance, Mr. Cook?
Thank you. No report for budget or finance or project oversight.
All right, thank you. Honored citizens, Mrs. Knight.
Yes, this meeting, I'm going to honor all the teachers and the staff members at the schools because I know they're all itching to get back to normal. But I just want to say thank you to the teachers and the bus drivers and all the cafeteria workers because they are putting in some hours, and I know a lot of them are not getting their shots. So, but I just wanted to honor them tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Law and Public Safety, Mr. Schmidt.
Well, thank you. The next Law and Public Safety Committee meeting will be on February 2nd, 4 o'clock in council chambers here. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Rule suspension motion, first and only reading with immediate effectivity for ordinances 2021 5E, 2021 6E, 2021 7E, and 2021 10E. Is there a motion? So moved by Mr. Lippert, second by Mr. Wilson. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, yes? Yes. Those opposed, no. And that did carry. Thank you. Unfinished business.
Okay. Third reading of ordinance 2020-64, adopting the recommendation of the Sharonville Planning Commission to accept dedication of public right-of-way on Lebanon Road.
Is there a motion to pass ordinance 2020-64? So moved by Mr. Wilson, second by Mrs. Knight. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Lippert?
Yes.
Mr. Duda?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Ordinance 2020-64 has been approved. Third reading of ordinance 2020-66, authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract to purchase highway rock salt for the 2021-2022 winter season to replenish the city's salt inventory.
Is there a motion to pass ordinance 2020-66? So moved by Mr. Cook, second by Mrs. Knight. Is there any discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Lippert?
Yes.
Mr. Duda?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Ordinance 2020-66 has been approved. Third reading of ordinance 2020-67, authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract to install new garage doors for the Public Works Garage.
Is there a motion to pass ordinance 2020-67? So moved by Mr. Wilson, second by Mr. Lippert. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Lippert?
Yes.
Mr. Duda?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Ordinance 2020-67 has been approved. Third reading of ordinance 2020-68, authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract for the replacement of the roofs for the 3 Golden View Acre buildings.
Is there a motion to pass ordinance 2020-68? So moved by Mrs. Knight, second by Mr. Cook. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Lippert?
Yes.
Mr. Duda?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Ordinance 2020-68 has been approved. This is a second reading of ordinance 2021-01, rezoning property located at 3855 Hawk Road, auditor parcel number 608-0028-0023, from general business to public facilities. And that's it for unfinished.
And we'll move on to new business, please.
All right. First and only reading of ordinance 2021-05E, an ordinance creating a TIF area in the city of Sharonville, Ohio, pursuant to section 5709.40B of the Ohio Revised Code declaring improvements to parcels of real property located within the TIF area to be a public purpose, exempting from real property taxation 75% of those improvements, requiring the owners of the parcels to make service payments in lieu of taxes, establishing a Lebanon Road TIF Lakota tax increment equivalent fund for the deposit of those service payments, specifying the public infrastructure improvements to be made that directly benefit the parcels, authorizing the execution of such other documents as may be necessary, and declaring an emergency.
Is there a motion to pass ordinance 2021-5E? So moved by Mr. Lippert, second by Mr. Wilson. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Lippert?
Yes.
Mr. Duda?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Ordinance 2021-05E has been approved. First and only reading of ordinance 2021-06E, an ordinance creating a TIF area in the city of Sharonville, Ohio, pursuant to sections 5709.40B of the Ohio Revised Code, declaring improvements to parcels of real property located within the TIF area to be a public purpose, exempting from real property taxation 75% of those improvements, requiring the owners of the parcels to make service payments in lieu of taxes, establishing a Lebanon Road TIF Princeton tax increment equivalent fund for the deposit of those service payments, specifying the public infrastructure improvements to be made that directly benefit the parcels, authorizing the execution of such other documents as may be necessary, and declaring an emergency.
Is there a motion to pass ordinance 2021-6E? So moved by Mr. Cook, second by Mrs. Knight. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Lippert?
Yes.
Mr. Duda?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Okay, ordinance 2021-06E has been approved. This is a first and only reading of ordinance 2021-07E, an ordinance approving and authorizing the execution and delivery of a redevelopment agreement with Anchor Sharonville Partners LLC, authorizing the execution of such other documents related thereto as may be necessary, and declaring an emergency.
Is there a motion to pass ordinance 2021-7E? So moved by Mr. Wilson, second by Mrs. Knight. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Lippert?
Yes.
Mr. Duda?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Ordinance 2021-07E has been approved. First reading of emergency ordinance 2021-08E, authorizing the safety service director to enter into a contract to purchase a medic unit and dispose of an existing medic unit, and declaring an emergency.
Is there a motion to pass ordinance?
That's just first reading.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine. This is just a first reading of ordinance 2021-09, authorizing safety service director to enter into a contract with the Kleinger's Group, Inc. to provide engineering and site plan review for calendar year 2021 and approving the Kleinger's Group, Inc.'s 2021 fee schedule. That is just a first reading. This is a first and only reading of ordinance 2021-10E, an ordinance amending the pay provisions of ordinance 97-68 to allow the clerk of council to be paid at an hourly rate approximating the pay established in ordinance 97-68 when the clerk of council holds an additional full-time non-exempt position with the city of Sharonville.
Is there a motion to pass 2021-10E? So moved by Mr. Wilson, second by Mr. Lippert. Is there any discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Lippert?
Yes.
Mr. Duda?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
That is good. Ordinance 2021-10E has passed.
That's good news.
That is good news. This is just a first reading of emergency resolution 2021 R01E. Resolution authorizing the safety service director and chief of police to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Cincinnati Child Exploitation Task Force, and declaring an emergency. That is just a first reading.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
Residents wishing to be heard this evening? There's nobody out in Zoom land. Other matters to be heard this evening? Mr. Schmidt, you had called me.
Yes, I wanted to just take a few minutes this evening to share some experiences, some observations, give some recognition, and express some appreciation for some recent things that I have observed. Before retiring and becoming a elected official, I worked at a large chemical manufacturing facility. And here, even as the site manager, I was a member of the emergency response team. I'm not sure if this team was required by corporate or by OSHA or both, but because we handled a number of quite hazardous chemicals in quantities that were significant. Training was quite extensive. PPE response procedures were rather exacting and very well defined, and they had to be because you're responding to hazardous or potentially hazardous manufacturing situations. The COVID virus exposure is in many ways as hazardous or perhaps even more hazardous than sulfur trioxide, organic vapors, oxides of nitrogen, because there's a delayed response. A few weeks ago, our neighbor was experiencing breathing difficulties and wanted assistance from our fire department. Both a medic unit and a pumper responded, and I was able to observe the entire response from our front yard, neighboring front yard. This brought many memories back to me of my training and the responses that I had been a part of. Fortunately, there were not a lot. Our Sharonville responders did an excellent job, from removing the individual from the house to the gurney to the ambulance. All correct PPE, and the protocols were exactly followed. Concern for both the individual and his family and themselves was most apparent as they worked as a very efficient and excellent team. When the ambulance passed by our house on its journey to the hospital, I could only think and want to say to the members, well done. One could comment perhaps that the responders were well trained, equipped, and adequately compensated, but there is much more. The dedication, commitment, courage, discipline are the differences between a good response and a great or excellent one. All these qualities were apparent to me, as well as to the very special gifts that these our responders have. Our neighbor has fully recovered, as he's described on Facebook, after several days in the hospital and even time on a ventilator. What comfort there is for all of us as residents of Sharonville to know that such assistance is readily and rapidly available when needed. I speak tonight only for myself, but I'm quite confident that all of our other elected officials here this evening share my appreciation and gratitude to all our first responders, sharing their expertise, and most importantly, the very special gifts that first responders have to be with us at our times of very need, our citizens, our businesses, our visitors. Thank you very much, first responders of Sharonville.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Seeing none, is there a motion for adjournment? So moved by Mr. Wilson, second by Mr. Lippert. All those in favor, yes? Yes. Those opposed, no, and we do stand adjourned.